Hello and welcome back to By the Fire podcast, where I, Ken, your host, take you through mythical tales and creatures from across the Black diaspora. We are back with another episode, and I've got a review today about a book that I read this month, and this book was gifted to me by the host of Travel and Ship podcast, D. Carey, so I really appreciate that. And the book I'm talking about is The Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and this book was published in 1937, and it discusses a woman who, I don't even know how to make this sound more profound. It's an amazing book, but she goes through 3 different relationships, and intertwined in those is many themes still being discussed today. So things like racism, sexism, texturism, colorism, anti-blackness, really, what else? Classism as well. So an amazing book to read. But I thought in this not so review I would discuss the folklore that's talked about, and the main folklore that is mentioned, referenced to in the book twice, is John the Conqueror. So who is John the Conqueror? And by the way, it's written as John D. Conqueror, because what I love about Hurston's writing in this book in particular is that the dialogue, all of the dialogue, is written in the vernacular used at the time. It's set mostly in Eatonville, Florida, which was actually the first all-black town established, and down south Florida in the earlier 20th century. And I was doing a bit of digging, and I don't really know American geography, and Eatonville is very much rural, so it was the reason why I say this is because they call him John D. Conqueror. And again, so who is John the Conqueror? John the Conqueror is an important figure in African American folklore, and he is supposedly a son of a king from Congo, and he was brought to America via the slave trade. And in the book, he's used or symbolized as an idol, as a man known to be full of nature and salt, and he is described as someone who wouldn't do the work enforced by their enslavers. So he wouldn't mow the hay, he wouldn't he would refuse to be whipped, and it was even mentioned in the book by another character that they weren't men like him around anymore. And what I find really inspirational, what really interesting about John the Conqueror in particular, and Zora Neale Hurston's relationship connection with that figure in particular, with him, is that he's seen as someone who's full of hope. He is likened to be a trickster. He's compared with Brer Rabbit, who are both people in situations where they are downtrodden upon. So Brer Rabbit obviously is a small rabbit, but he uses his wisdom, his wit, to get himself out of tricky situations. Similarly, but more seriously, with John the Conqueror, is that he's brought to America as a slave. He's oppressed and by white supremacy, by his white enslavers, and he is still able to rise above his situation. He's seen as someone who is a trickster, who's able to just elevate from where he is. And speaking of elevation, there actually is a story, a small tiny story in the book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, which talks about John the Conqueror and how he's in the gates with God and old Peter, who is Saint Peter. And if you want to hear that full little story that's in the book, I'm going to read it for those who are in my mailing list, so make sure you subscribe for free. Anyway, I digress. So Zora Neale Hurston writes an article in 1943, which was one of the darkest times in history, because it's World War II, America is involved in this war, and black soldiers are abroad fighting for a country that doesn't accept them, that doesn't give them rights, And so it's one thing to go over to war, but it's one thing, to come back and still not be recognised for the work you've done. So Zora Neale Hurston writes an article in the American Mercury, which is a magazine, and she wrote this article to sort of build hope for the soldiers who are abroad. And it says, "So the brother in black offers to these United States the source of courage that endures and laughter. Hi John the Conqueror. If the news from overseas reads bad, if the nation inside seems like it is stuck in the tar baby, listen hard, and you will hear High John the Conqueror treading on his singing drum. You will know then that no matter how bad things look now, it will be worse for those who seek to oppress us. White America, take a laugh from out of our black mouths and win. We give you High John the Conqueror." So it's sort of her saying, like, look, bro, we have the strength in us which comes from High John the Conqueror. And she mentions in her other book, which is called High John the Conqueror, she mentions that he's not dead. He went back to Africa, but he left his powers here in America and placed his American dwelling in the root of a certain plant. Only possess that root and he can be summoned at any time. Which I always say I find things interesting, but it's true, I actually do. And I say that because the root that they're talking about is called the Ipomoea purga. I really hope I'm saying that right. Commonly known as a julep, it's sometimes used as a laxative, and it also has its ties with hoodoo. So that's the root, and basically that plant is used as a way to summon John the Conqueror. I do really hope you enjoyed this episode. Not as planned as my previous ones. This isn't a story, but life happens, and I really wanted to get something out for you guys. So yeah, thank you for listening, and have a lovely weekend. Be sure to rate and comment on Apple Podcast and follow on Spotify. You can also listen on SoundCloud and YouTube, and use the hashtag BTFpod so we can continue the conversation online, and I look forward to you joining me for the next episode. Follow at bythefire_pod on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter, as well as By the Fire Podcast on Facebook. You can also join my free mailing list where I post a video with extra information relating to this episode. And if you'd like to financially support, you can support my Ko-fi, KO-FI, where you'll be able to access behind the scene footage and transcripts of every story, depending on which membership tier you join. If you have a creature of folklore you'd like to hear or would like to be a guest on the show, send a submission on my website, www.bythefirepodcast.com. If you scroll all the way down, there'll be a submissions box where you can send me your ideas, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Next week, I'll be sending an email to those in my mailing list where they'll be able to receive all these extra tidbits, and yeah, if you want to be a part of that, get to it. Otherwise, I can't wait for you to join me again in 2 weeks' time by the fire. Bye!